Welcome to the Financial Advisors Want to Know podcast, sponsored by Dominion Enterprise Services. I'm Catherine Tindall, CPA and founder of Dominion. We're a tax and accounting firm focused exclusively on serving advisors for their own tax planning and filing needs as business owners. At Dominion, we work alongside advisory firm owners to bring proactive strategy, clarity, and confidence to their tax planning so they can focus on growing their firms. The focus of this show is to cover different areas that I've experienced as a tax planner, working with advisor clients in their lives, building their practices. So let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. This is Catherine. On today's episode, I have a very special guest, Molly Pierce. She is the CEO of Track That Advisor, where she helps financial advisors turn data into one of their greatest competitive advantages. Her focus is helping advisors and their teams move beyond guesswork and make confident, data-backed decisions that create sustainable success. Known for blending strategy and real-world execution, Molly is passionate about helping advisors uncover the story behind their numbers and use that insight to build stronger, more profitable businesses. She plays a key role in shaping Track That Advisor's national benchmarking studies, which we'll be talking about today, advisor growth initiatives, and partnerships across the financial services industry. She also hosts conversations with the industry's top leaders through her podcast, The Advisor Summit, which I encourage you to tune into that, where she brings practical, tactical, and analytical insights to advisors looking to grow smarter. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Molly. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm excited for this conversation for sure.
Yeah, because I feel like, we kind of come from slightly different angles, but are ultimately kind of coming to the same center point, which is the work that we do is just based off of data and, the kind of KPIs, analytics, information that you look at versus, our side on tax and accounting. We're looking at kind of financials and, more of that, like just coming from the purely like financial reporting background. It's like where those worlds collide. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
And with the story it tells, I think a lot of people miss that component is data. It's one thing to know your numbers and a whole other thing to actually understand your numbers. And that's why I love any conversation I have with you, because one, I don't have to convince you data is important. You know that, and we preach the same message. And anyone listening, data is important, and I could rattle about that forever. But it's the story that it tells, and being able to make true decisions on it is so good and so impactful, truly, for your whole practice. But I love what you do. Huge fan, and I agree. It kind of blends two sides of the story together.
Yeah. And it's funny because it doesn't lie, right? I think for a lot of advisors, like I'll talk to them about kind of, how's your practice going? Like, what's going on? And, even when I first meet people, I'll collect a couple of initial data points from them before we talk. And so going into the conversation, like I was just talking to one advisor where, he told me what his top line revenue was. He told me what his AUM was and, how many households he's serving. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, you've got this going on in the practice, right? Like you've got that going on and you've got this going on. And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, because of like just where these ratios are, you're going to be experiencing this, or you're going to be experiencing that, or, oh, okay, like you have a pricing problem. Like I can just see that from, miles away because of just how some of these ratios are, or, even just things like, oh, you're going to have a labor efficiency problem because you've got a pricing problem because of how these ratios are. So it's really interesting. And I find a lot of times, that data, those data points don't lie in terms of, if you've got the correct information coming in. So, maybe we could start from that standpoint, because I know for a lot of advisors, and it's funny, I'm even working a case right now where this is like a core thing that they're trying to grapple with, in the stage, I see a lot of the stages when it comes to data analysis is just like, well, first we have to have the correct output information. And that can be a real lift to get that correct. And then the second layer is like, okay, now we need to have a regular system where we're reviewing this. And then the third is, okay, well, what is the story that this is telling us? And then what action are we going to take on it, right? So maybe just to start at that first layer of, when you're working with firms where that first, like actually getting good data integrity and getting the right information out, what are some of the things that you see, maybe that surprise firm owners when they're kind of getting that initial process, at least getting that information?
Yeah, honestly, Catherine, that's a great place to start, because I so often will get on the call and they're like, no, we have great data. We have great data. We have great data. Right. And then I have to be the bad guy and be like, actually, in the most professional way possible, your data sucks. Like, I don't know how else to tell you that, is that it's not good. it's not good because of XYZ. It's because you didn't tie this source back efficiently, or you have 14 different names for this one source and then it's not tying together. And that's a hard conversation to have, especially because a lot of these advisors are spending so much money if they, build their own CRM system or are utilizing a CRM system. And their teams also, I have such a heart for the teams, and they're spending so much time and effort to enter the information and get it accurate, but they just don't have a good system in place. So that's just the first conversation we have to have is, hey, your data is actually not as good as you think. And then secondarily, it's an action plan to say, hey, how are we going to get your data to be better? So I love Track That Advisor system because it's very efficient, because it's very time efficiency is huge to us. We don't want it to consume your team's time. Data shouldn't be something that is a full-time job. I'm a firm believer in that. You should use the data and understand the data, but it is not a full-time gig for someone to just get your data. So I love that practice, but I also say there's a ton of other ways to get good data, but you have to make sure it's integral. So be checking it, have a process in place, ensure your systems are up to date, ensure that everybody on your team is aligned with how you're entering data, because that's a big piece of the puzzle too, is when you have two people doing it XYZ way and then two people doing it ABC way, huge differences there. That's really going to skew the data. And especially if you're an advisor that does use your data, kind of that second layer, okay, now we have the data. Now we're going to actually use it to make decisions. You are doing yourself such a disservice if you are not having accurate data and making those decisions, because now the story is saying one thing and it might say, hey, especially in our case, it might be like radio's doing really well for you, but it's not, because your data is not integral, because you're maybe allocating a ton of new prospects to radio, but they didn't actually hear you on the radio. They came through a dinner seminar. So it's falsely negating a lot of these data points. So I always say, like, benchmarking even, yes, there's great benchmarks, but if you don't have a tool to actually get your data, you might as well not spend time on it. And I hate to say that because I'm so pro data, but if you're not going to do it right, don't do it at all, quite frankly.
Yeah. So I guess for advisors who are maybe struggling with this, what are like the first easiest lifts to start to get the visibility that you recommend as like a minimum visibility? Say like, just maybe to give you a little more context, like I'm imagining this is going to be firms in like the sub 100 million AUM space. Maybe you've got one advisor where they've got, a couple of team members underneath them. Like their finger is still in every relationship. Like they're still like really in it. That's where I tend to see, like, from the financial side of things, that firms have to go through the transition of like, okay, you're not going to be able to see everything at a certain point. Yeah. Like once you start getting like north of $1 million in revenue, like you just are one person, you're not going to be able to be in everything. So, when it goes from the like solo advisor, your fingers in everything, you can see everything, you're involved in everything, you remember the case notes and things like that too. Now you're starting to transition into oh no, the system has to remember, the system has to have the information. It can't just be in my head. What are some of like the places where they should be starting? Like what are the more important areas that they should be focusing on, like from your perspective, kind of in that transition of like practice change?
Yeah, this is really timely too, Catherine, because we actually just finished a massive study that tracked kind of 0 to 40 million of new assets per year. And then we segmented 40 to 120 of new assets and then 120 and above. And it was really so clear and so telling of how those different practice sizes operate with their structure of sources and with their structure of marketing funnels. And even within the structure of how they have maybe a solo advisor for kind of that first segmentation and then added advisors for that second and third segmentation. And there were fun surprises throughout for sure. But I would say I always recommend our TTA Top 5 as the starting place. And this is even for solo advisors that are just starting to track their data, or maybe you do have a massive firm and you just have never even gotten into tracking at all. And you just kind of have done it by, your grit and your stamina and all of that. So I always recommend starting with one of these. And it does not have to be all 5. I always say, if you have a team member that can begin to track it, great. Just choose one. And I always recommend stick rate. Stick rate is your first starting place. That is the number of kept first appointments versus the number of set first appointments. So even just for this month, whatever month this airs, go back to the beginning of the month. literally go through your calendar, have your assistant go through your calendar, count how many appointments you have kept, and then divide it by the number of appointments you have set in that month. And that is going to give you your stick rate. That benchmark should be roughly 70%. So 7 out of every 10 people who say they're going to come in should come in at some point. That is your kind of benchmark there. Now, it does vary slightly by like regions. For example, we have found that Midwesterners, if they say they're coming, they're coming. Like whether they got to get through blizzard or whatever it is, they are coming. Versus New Yorkers are a little different. Like
Yeah.
depending on what they decide that morning, you know what I mean? So it does vary regionally, but benchmarking we always say is a tool, not a rule. So kind of know your practice, and every practice is very unique and very different in some regards. But for the most part, we really do love benchmarks because it tells us a story. So that is great. That is the only one you get out of this entire podcast. That's totally fine. I recommend starting there. Next is also going to be your close rate. Now, this is the number of people that you have actually became clients or that households you've served versus those that have kept their first appointment. So once you kind of gather your stick rate, you'll have that kept first appointment number, and then you'll have the number of clients that you've served. You'll divide the two. That'll be your close rate. I love a benchmark here, Catherine, because I think it is the most freeing benchmark we give out in any of our studies, is that close rate should be 30%. There are so many times advisors come to me and they're like, my buddy told me he has an 80% close rate. And I'm like, your buddy is a liar. You need to and that's on you, dude. You know what I mean? Like genuinely.
Yeah.
But then they think that's the standard, is an 80% close, or advisors just say, get him in front of me and I will close. That is not the case. Now, if you're doing referrals all day long, you should be closing 80% if you're doing referrals. But if you're doing dinner, seminars, radio, any kind of marketing funnel, really, 30% should be where you're at. So it also is really key, and it's really telling to us, is that a lot of people are like, man, I need more leads. And you actually, a lot of times don't. You need to focus on your pipeline and closing what you have. That is also really critical. So that's close rate. We also look at average case size, and everyone says you can't choose a favorite child, but of the TTA top 5, by far my favorite metric / child right here is average case size, because it tells us so much. So average case size is the new assets that you've brought in from prospects divided by the households that you've served for new prospects. You can kind of exclude existing clients. You already have them. Don't count that in the math. And that is going to give you your average case size. What that tells me is, one, if you have a higher average case size, you typically don't need as many leads to come through the funnel. You need to have more quality leads. So that's really telling. For days between appointments are going to be much higher. It takes a lot longer for big fish to close. So when you get frustrated because you're like, man, it's taking them 30 days, it's taking them 45 days, that is not the benchmark. The benchmark should be 10 to 15 days. But if you have a large client, that is going to be normal. And so you just know that. You know the story of what you're telling. If you are more transactional and like your 250K average case size or less, you're going to need leads. You're going to need to whip them in. You're going to need to move them along, and you're going to need to close them a little bit quicker. Kind of goes to allocation size also. If you're more FIA heavy versus AUM heavy, you'll kind of know that with your average case size, but really critical to know that, especially as you're backing into, hey, this is my goal for the year. Well, if you have a more transactional practice and smaller average, you need a lot more leads. So it's helpful for your marketing department. It's helpful realistically also for a lifestyle. If I know, hey, I need to have a lot more appointments, okay, I'm going to structure it a little bit differently. I might, put my kids in a little bit more school or whatever the case is. Just from a family perspective, also, you will structure your life differently.
Yeah.
Then we talk, So, and then we talk about pending leads. So this is really important. And it's something that I'm really passionate about, but also want to give people a lot of grace about, because I think when I talk to advisors a lot, they're like, man, I just need more. And they just kind of blame the marketing department for not getting more leads in. And I just have a heart for the marketing teams. I think you guys take so much crap, and it's like not fair at all to you. So I have a heart for them so much. But a lot of times what we see is these days between appointments get longer and longer and longer. And we say benchmark should be 10 to 15 days, but they have so many leads coming in that they can't service them. And then that is a problem. So really look at how many leads you have and say, okay, one, are these really pending? Or do we need to put no, they're not going to come in. These leads are kind of, for lack of a better term, dead, and we need to kind of move them off of our system. Or are they actually real? So A lot of information thrown at you. Feel free to poke holes or questions. We'll kind of start there, but really pick one. I'm so pro, just pick one.
Yeah, no, and I think even just for, when I think about kind of how things transition onto our side of things. So like when you talk about average case size, like that one in particular, for advisors where they're trying to evaluate their existing book too, like not just new client acquisition. That's usually a very telling figure in terms of
Yes.
like how that practice is going to grow. Even things like when you're going to bring in your next hire, like what kind of person you should be bringing in. Um, and then just things like if we have a really high average case size, I expect the ratio of AUM to households to be very different than one of your like more higher volume, smaller case size teams. And then I expect like a pretty different profit margin too, just because the cost to serve is
Yeah.
usually less, but it just
Yes.
depends, right? So but they have their own issues, right? Like it's kind of that, do you want to be serving a bunch of, a smaller crew of larger clients, or do you want to be doing a much higher number of smaller clients where they are more similar, maybe less is going on, also just depends on kind of your preference as an advisor.
Catherine here. Just wanted to say thanks for tuning into the show and hope you've been enjoying it. Since we're all at the mercy of social media algorithms, if you wouldn't mind rating the podcast on whatever platform that you listen to, I'd really appreciate it. And also, if you're looking to stay in the loop on current tax updates, what the firm is working on, and just the things that I think you as a firm owner need to be aware of when it comes to the world of tax, you can sign up for our newsletter using the link below. I only send out editions when we have really useful things to share or things that I think are important to have your attention and energy on. So let's get back to the show. And thanks again for being a listener.
I guess in terms of like average case sizes, do you tend to see people in different groups there, or I guess to just kind of jump in a little bit more into that metric in particular? Because I find that's the one that touches my world the most.
Thank you. Okay. Somebody else to be a favorite with me.
Yeah, because part of it is like it shows the business model of the business, right? As long as you're not getting huge variations where that number is not going to be representative. So like I work in practices where they've got a couple of whale clients and then a bunch of tiny clients, and then that will skew that number incorrectly. Yeah. But if you basically have a book where it's pretty similar, similar composition, like a lot of what the challenge of the business is going to be is kind of determined by that. Like that's going to tell you the path that you're on. So I guess any more like reflections that you have in like specific things that you've seen with, firms either trying to change that number or just any like specific, more specific kind of case things that people should be thinking of when it comes to like when they look at that number for themselves, maybe evaluating their existing book,
Yeah. A couple of things on it for sure. I think it's interesting because like you said, you have to kind of take out your outliers for certain. That's hugely important when you're looking at this. Yeah. If you got two big whales in the season, great. I love that for you, but take them out. That's not true. It's going to falsely negate your numbers. But we had a case study actually, and it was a client that started with us about 7 years ago. So this has been a pretty good long-term relationship where we've seen a ton of trend and a ton of data in their systems. And this is honestly probably one of my favorite parts of my job, Catherine, is because you just see people grow and you see people start as that solo advisor and you get to kind of start to track their numbers and you just see them build this massive company that's just crushing it. And you're like, man, I just love being a small part of your story, but really just yeah, not that we're like hugely important or anything, but just cheering you on and seeing that. And their average case size truly has made such a difference. And I will say too, you cannot compare realistically yourself to anyone else because you have different goals, you have different seasons, you have different things that you want in life for your practice. And so a lifestyle practice, you're probably going to have a smaller average case size because one, you're not as picky with your clients. You want to help who's in your circle of influence. You want to help referrals. Referrals typically tend to be smaller average case size in some regards, depending on your current clientele. Like that's going to be pretty telling. But this one specifically, they started as a very transactional organization and was just like, you know what, we're young, we're hungry. will take kind of anything and everything. And then throughout the years, they knew, they were like, we're going to have to work really hard. We're going to have a ton of clients. They started with dinner seminars, and then they slowly added in radio and TV. And I will say, from a marketing perspective, radio and TV do tend to have very high average case size clients. It's people, especially TV.
I'm surprised by that.
Yes, I know everyone is, but TV especially has very good clients that come out of it. Now, when we talk about TV, I say you need your 2 Ps. You need a purse and you need patience, because it's going to take them a long time to get through. And they have a very high average cost per client. Like that, you just are going to know you're going to pay for it. But typically they become very good clients. And then from that, referrals. So there's a lot out of that. But just talking about average case size, yes, this case study, they started really small. They grinded super hard. They were able just to kind of take in whoever, built their processes and built their systems. And now they do not touch anyone under $1 million. They are very specific, but that is their lowest amount that they will take is $1 million of liquid assets. That's their case sizes. They will not help anyone less than that, because they've grown to that. And they do know also, okay, yes, do we need less people? However, it does take them a lot longer to move people through their sales cycle. They've had to really proposition themselves as this expert that only helps high net worth clients. Like, it's a very niche market, and it's a very different market than elsewhere. And I want people to hear that, because that's maybe not you. And it's also very true to them. And that's who they love serving. And they love the complications that come with high net worth clients, because it's not all rays of sunshine, right? Like, it does come with a lot more. Hey, now you have to talk about generational wealth a lot of times, and like, what are the complications of that? And do you have a trust, side as well that can help them? They're looking for more holistic practices that can offer them all in one solutions. So that's just kind of one example of average case size. We also have so many advisors that are like, you know what? I just love serving smaller clients. Like, that is where my heart is. That is where I enjoy it. That is my passion. And I'm like, that's amazing. So I would say, one, honestly, yes, average case size can say so much about your practice, but genuinely look at yourself and say, what do I want my practice to stand for? Who do I enjoy working with? I think a lot about life is about the pleasure of working, and like, working is such a joy, and like, working is, you should do everything for a purpose, and we were not meant here to be stagnant or do nothing. But you also have to know who you enjoy working with. So we have a lot of clients, like one specifically, they niche down and they're like, we only work with dentists. We just like dentists. We like the dental field. We just like that type of person, versus someone's like, I only work with engineers. Well, guess what? Those two advisors don't ever want to switch, because engineer minds are very different than dental doctor minds. So it's like, you really have to find who you work with. And then, yes, like, the biggest thing is start tracking your average case size so that you know what it is. So if you do want to make a switch, or you do want to make a change, at least you have that knowledge to know, hey, this is where I started and this is why I'm making the change. Don't just willy-nilly it. That is the biggest thing you can do wrong, is just saying, oh, I'm just changing because I feel like it. Like, oh my gosh, do not feel. Like, I'm sorry. Don't shut your emotions down. Like, put them back in the box. Like, look at the data. And you mentioned this earlier too, not just that the data can say so much, but it can really be such an honest mirror image of what is in the practice. And a lot of times we don't want to see that, right? Like, we don't want to go, I don't want to see the ugly. I don't want to see the dirty. I want to put my head in the sand. But the beautiful thing about data is it's not emotional. It is going to tell you what is true and what the facts are. And that's integral data. Integral data is going to tell you what the facts are. So it's a lot, but yeah, average case size is huge.
Yeah. And it's funny that, like, that last point that you make, because I've on the financials side, I've just found that to be so true. Like, once we've got the accurate information in there, I'll have people tell me vibes. I get a lot of like vibes based information. Yeah. Just like, oh, okay. So, the practice is doing this, like, we're doing this, this, and that. I think we're going to end up here. Or like, I feel burnt out, so I think the next thing I need to do is this, and then I start digging a little bit, and it's like, okay, you feel burnt out. How many households is it? Okay, and then this is your top line revenue. That's why you're burnt out. You there's only so many levers here that you can pull, and is adding on more headcount on the team actually going to deburn you out? Like,
yeah. Sometimes it's worse. I mean, as bad as that sounds, I love people, but sometimes I'm like, man, if I put one more, like, and you don't want to disrupt your team, right? Like, if you have an awesome team, adding one more could wreck that. So I'm with you. There's a lot of things people need to look at before they just decide the vibe. It's gotta be.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes the decision that you actually need to make, sometimes it's a harder and scarier decision, but like once you look at the math and you jump into it, a lot of times this is the case for doing like a partial book sale or doing a price increase. There's like a lot of fear around those two moves, but sometimes like it's just what you need to do to get the leverage to get yourself the breathing room so that you can keep going. And, a lot of times people will try to solve those kinds of problems. Like they try to solve pricing problems with increased headcount. And it's, so it's those kinds of things. I guess, in the top 5, like what are the ones you've found, in those benchmarks, what are the ones that you've found have really surprised advisors the most? Like where, they weren't tracking it and now they start tracking it and it does reveal a lot more insight around what they need to be changing. Like, are there ones in particular, some cases that you've worked that are like we had no idea this was like this? Or I guess any situations that stick out in your mind?
Yeah, there's definitely 2 in my mind that stick out. And one, actually, we just talked about this morning, which was really fun. And it was that they were looking at their close rate and they were looking at their, just overall book of business, and they were doing really well. They were super profitable. They were like, man, our marketing's crushing it. We're doing super well. Well, 60% of their book was coming from referrals. So when they took out the referrals, they looked at their stick rate, they looked at their close rate, they started to look at the whole entirety of their prospect story and found that their marketing was honestly doing relatively bad for the most part, which was wild because they're super profitable and they're great. But we're like, man, if you don't get referrals next year, you're really not going to be in a good place at all. So that is surprising to some people. Take a look at your referrals. And yes, referrals and existing clients should build up roughly 40% of your business between those two things. Is kind of the benchmark that we look at. But look at your marketing as a subset as a whole, and that will really shock you. The second thing is we touched on this earlier, is close rate. This one always surprises advisors when we look at it and we'll say, hey, 30% is the national average. A lot of times we'll break it out by different advisors on the team. And then you usually find 1 or 2 people that are really skewing the data. So it's like, hey, whether for positive or negative, most times we find it's negative, that it's like, hey, Joey just cannot close. He's at a 15%. He's bringing it down. Like, then you kind of have to do what you do, have that tough conversation and be like, okay, we're not saying fire Joey, but we're saying he needs better training, or you need to really follow his process and look at him and what is he doing differently than the rest of the group, because everybody else is doing great. Joey's not doing well. So let's take a look at that. So, but I also just think that benchmark of 30% is so freeing. And I love talking about it because advisors, every single time, they're like, I'm shocked that's it. And then they're like, I'm doing much better. And I'm like, great, show me the numbers. Show me your numbers that you're doing much better. Right? And then it's like that gut feeling. You're like, you're actually not, but that's okay. I'll be honest with you. And a lot of them are doing great. So I'm not saying it's always a surprise, but people are most surprised by that. We also say of the top 5, just try to increase it by 5%. And that is another kind of surprising thing for advisors. We do kind of a tracking course where we teach people. We have an online version and in person, and they're both really fun. But we teach people how to use their data. And every time we've done it, we found, hey, if you increase this 5%, you would have millions more dollars in the pipeline. Like we just did one, and I think it was 5 firms, and we uncovered $105 million that they would have been in front of if they increased their stick rate by 5%, if they increased their close rate by 5% to meet those benchmarks. And it's like, gosh, you think $105 million more between 5 offices. Like, how much more profitable could you get? And even in all of our reviews that we do, we typically find about $10 million of unrealized profit because of something that they've missed. And that is not adding more marketing. That is not doing more work. It's really just taking advantage of what you have in your pipeline and increasing that and training better. So I'm always like, look at your numbers though, for no surprises. You don't want to be surprised. When you come to me and you're surprised, I feel sad because I'm like, yeah, no, I got to tell you the bad news. Like, go look at your numbers so that they can tell you. But that's also like the joy of our job, is we get to help people in that regards. And it's always, but yeah, close rate's always surprising. And then just realistically, like not even knowing your numbers is surprising too. So
Yeah. Well, and I really love that last point you made as well with, once you change something that's higher up in the funnel, it's going to have this multiplication effect for everything that falls below it. And then if you like each of the little constraint points, if you can just pop it open like a bit, you can end up doubling like very easily doubling performance with just like a couple of 5% improvements in key areas. Like it's amazing. Like it just doesn't, you just wouldn't think that it works like that. You're like, oh, well, if I'm going to do, if I'm going to double my revenue, I have to double my leads. And it's like, no, actually you don't. Like if you just like work this whole system like slightly better, you could double your profit. Like, it's amazing. Like, but if you don't have that data, you're not going to be able to figure out like, it's the old plumber comes in and hits the pipe. It's like you're not going to be able to figure out which thing is the constraint to actually go after it to like get the next constraint to pop it open. Yeah. So, that's
and
really
people make it complicated, right, Catherine? Like people really do make it complicated. And I always say, I'm not going to ask you to run a marathon before you've even done a 5K. You know what I mean? Like with tracking also, they just data tracking in general, they make it very overcomplicated where it's analysis paralysis, where it's like, I'm sure you find this also. It's, man, I've been tracking this million things, but I've been doing that way for years. And I always poke holes and I always ask, why are you tracking that figure? Why are you tracking that number? And they're like, I don't know. It's just that way we've done it. And that's my favorite answer because I'm like, I'm about to save you so much time and effort. You don't need the whole thing. You don't have to have everything. You need key pieces to give you the visual of the story, what you can improve, and then you can move on. So it's not always more. I'm a big fan of less is more.
Yeah, I guess just one quick question on that. Like, are there any specific metrics that you find that people tend to track where you're like, I don't really think that that's actually that useful?
Yes. Okay, this one is going to shock people. Cost per lead. Everybody tracks it and everybody's like, why don't you have it on your trackers? And we have, probably honestly 1,000 data points, but everything fits together to tell you a visual story. But cost per lead is one we do not even keep on there because one, cost per lead is not telling me anything I need to know in terms of, hey, what happened with that lead? Did they move on? Was it a qualified lead? You could tell me all day, hey, my cost per lead is $50 a lead. And I'd be like, that's great. But how many converted to clients? Were they qualified? What was the revenue that it brought in? I quite frankly don't care about the cost per lead. Now we track cost per set first appointment and we track cost per client naturally, but cost per lead is one that I constantly say you do not need to track. You don't. Like what happened after the picture is much more important because like I said, someone could be like, hey, I have a cost per TV lead and it's $3,000. But they were $1.5 million case size versus, hey, I have a cost per lead that's $50. Okay, obviously that's technically a better cost per lead, but it was an unqualified lead and I couldn't even close them. Which one is actually better? The cost per $3,000 or the cost per $50? Well, obviously the 3,000 because it made this huge case size. So that one specifically, I will die on that hill, man. I just will. Like everybody asked me to add it. I'm like, I'm not doing it. At this point, it's out of spite, but honestly, it's for a purpose also. It really is for a purpose. So
yeah, because it's not really going to change your mind, right, on things because it's just too hot. It's too. It doesn't actually. Yeah, it doesn't tell you what you need to do. Versus like I like cost per set appointment. Like that's great. It's like, okay, they're qualified.
Yeah.
They've come through the marketing funnel. Like how much does it take for us to get one of those? And then what's our close rate off of that? Okay. Like now we've got kind of the 2 points where we can push, that makes a lot more sense to me.
Well,
I guess on the
data if you're not going to make decisions on it. My biggest thing is do not track it if it's not going to be a decision maker.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess on like the practice management side, like in practice management data, when it comes to more like operations pieces, like any things that you see people tend to track that you, maybe that people tends to not track that you think is a good tracking thing to pick up or, vice versa with the like people are tracking this. And I don't really think that it's providing a lot of value when it comes to more like the ops side KPIs.
Yeah, ops side is a little different. We don't do too much with the ops side other than more of the training aspect. Like we don't track workflows. We don't really track. We really don't step into that world. There's several amazing people we recommend people to. But from what we've seen, it's really just having a process. Our biggest thing is you have to have a process within your operations so that your tracking is accurate. And that is the biggest thing people miss is they're like, oh, we have all of these workflows and we have all of these things going on. But in reality, none of that makes sense and none of it's you have to have someone responsible and authoritative who is adding the data into the tracker or who is adding the data into the CRM. That is the one ops piece I'm just a big fan of is you have to have one person in charge of it. Now it can be one person for production and one person on the marketing side, but if more than one person is responsible, then no one is responsible. And you can even have more people flow down and say, okay, I have 4 people that are filling it in. Great. But who is the actual person I'm going to ask questions to and who is going to make sure that data is integral? So that's kind of the only ops side. Like I said, I don't get too much into ops mostly because that's dealing with people and I love numbers, but it's more the numbers side. But yeah, it's just have someone authoritative and have someone in charge.
Yeah, that's great. So for people who are interested in learning more about the work that you and your team do, Molly, could you speak a little bit more to kind of what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? And, I know you mentioned you have some courses that people can kind of do in their own pacing. Like, tell us a little bit more about how people can kind of get into your world.
Yeah. So always can email us on hello@trackthatadvisor.com. I'm also really active on LinkedIn. So if you just want to find me and DM me, we have a ton of free resources. We have our big aggregate study that we send to everybody if you want that as a free resource or a benchmarking guide that we send. Like you mentioned, we also have courses. If you have if you don't have data or don't have a tracking platform, we have that. That's kind of our biggest quote unquote seller. It's really just the way we help people the most is by actually getting your tracking. And then second to that, if you do have good data, we do offer courses now, whether it's in person or online, to actually know what to do with your data. That has been a huge heart project of ours this year is now there is AI and there are systems and we love that. Everyone's like, man, does that mean Track That Advisor is going away? I'm like, actually the opposite, because now it makes data more important. But what you do with that data is really impactful and important to us. So we do have courses that will teach you. We also have a whole resource library. You can find that on our website. And that is our TTA resource library. We do new articles and new studies every month on different topics. So it could be dinner seminars, what's happening with dinner seminars. We just did the allocation one, which it's like, what's the perfect marketing dial for people from the 0 to 40 million, 40 to 120 and 120 and above of new assets. So lots of resources on there. You can actually sign up for that on our website and it's pretty cheap. So you don't have to be a TTA client, but yeah, hello@trackthatadvisor.com is a great way to get in touch for sure. And we'll get you on the right path.
Yeah, awesome. No, and I totally appreciate the work that you and the team do. Like, it's so needed. And just, I'm like, we're in similar worlds in terms of, being under the hoods in different practices. And it's like, if we can get that data integrity, like that gives us the path of what we need to do. So I guess anything else that you want to leave the advisors with before we go? Any, final thoughts or nuggets you want to share?
Yeah, just start somewhere. That is really my biggest thing is just, and also give yourself grace. I think a lot of people are like, know that they should be tracking and it's almost this weight on their shoulders that they're like, I just don't know where to start. I don't know, how to track, or it's this big monster that you have to tackle. And the biggest piece of advice, honestly, is just start with one thing. Pick your stick rate. Like just for this month alone, figure out your stick rate. And then next month, maybe let's add close rate. And then the next month, maybe let's add average case size. Or just call us and we'll do it for you. That's a lot easier too. But I really do want to encourage people, just start somewhere. That's my biggest thing. And you guys are incredible and advisors are awesome. So you have the capability.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and especially with tech stack nowadays, it makes it much easier.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can have somebody else on the team, be held accountable for producing some of that, that also makes it more likely to happen. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Molly. And for those of you listening, we'll post nearby in the show notes some of the resources that she mentioned and how to get in touch. Definitely recommend reading the benchmark. I read the study, the aggregate study that you guys had put out recently, and very interesting. Like, I don't run a firm myself, but it's very interesting to kind of see where things landed. So I definitely recommend people check that out and kind of get in your orbit. So thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Financial Advisors Want to Know podcast, again, sponsored by Dominion Enterprise Services. If you found this episode valuable, I would love to personally hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I'm always interested in your feedback, future episode ideas, or questions you'd like to see covered in a future episode of the show. And be sure to subscribe to our monthly tax update newsletter, where we share timely tax insights and planning considerations specifically crafted for advisory firm owners and what we share to our own clients. We'll see you next time.